All right, folks, we will go ahead and get started now. Thank you again so much for joining us today on this special edition of CWA's Community Calls. We are super excited to have Emily Newman and Renita Smith here from Camber Outdoors, and we're excited to learn a lot from them today. So in order to get the most out of today's call, I just want to draw your attention to a few features of Zoom that we'll be using. There's 3 features that are in the bottom middle of your screen: the Q&A, the chat, and the raise hand. Go ahead and throughout the presentation today, you can type your questions into the Q&A box. I'll be keeping track of those, and then there will be time at the end for us to do a live Q&A with Emily and Renita. We've also already got a great little chat going in the chat box, so please feel free to keep chatting and putting your comments and thoughts in there. As you do so, make sure that you use the drop down to select all panelists and attendees so that not only the panelists but everybody else on the call can see your comments. And finally, during the Q&A at the end, if you would like to raise your hand, join in on the conversation, ask a question live, you can go ahead and use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you and get you on the call. The ground rules today, as always, the same as always, to be polite and respectful of each other and of our presenters. No personal political commentary. If you do raise your hand and speak live on the call, please try to limit your comments to 2 minutes. And we haven't had a problem with this yet, but we do have the ability to remove anyone who abuses these rules. So the purpose of today's call, you know, the CWA and Camber have gotten a lot of questions from our members and from the industry about, you know, what can we do in this moment? So we wanted to bring Camber on to help answer that question, help you think about what that question means for you, and kind of help you move past that question into action. So to that end, Camber will be presenting their workplace anti-racism action agenda. We will highlight some of the most promising corporate practices around workplace inclusion, equity, and diversity. We'll also provide a safe space for you all to ask questions. We understand that everybody is at a different point in this journey, so please feel comfortable to ask questions coming from where you're at. And finally, it's really important for the CWA to keep the JEDI discussion in the industry, in the indoor climbing industry, going. JEDI is another version of that acronym that I mentioned earlier, with the J added on for justice. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we are really excited and honored to have Emily Newman and Renita Smith with us today from Camber Outdoors. And I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having us here today. We're just thrilled to be presenting to your members. We're really excited and passionate, obviously, about this subject, and look forward to really diving into our presentation. But let me just first, I'll introduce myself, and then Renita will introduce herself. I came to Camber Outdoors a little under a year ago. My background is specifically around equity and inclusion, always in workplaces. So I began my career leading an organization in California that actually had a 93% success rate with helping persistently homeless individuals access and keep jobs. And we got a lot of national attention for that and for building a very large revenue generating element of that to support our programmatic mission. But since then, I worked for many years with a tribal government, helping them to put their philanthropic efforts together, thinking about economic development for tribes across the country, as well as for their local community. As well as I was a part of the leadership team with President Obama's My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which was an organization that helped to, that was focused on boys and young men of color, and helped to transition that work into a program that will continue within the Obama Foundation. So I spent some time with the tech sector, helping them to think about how to the systems and structures of their workplaces that support employees, and I'm thrilled to be here talking about that work in the outdoor industry. Renita?
Thank you, Emily, and good morning, everyone. I am the Chief Programs Officer at Camber, and I came to Camber Outdoors and to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion through sort of two ways. I have spent years on the brand side in marketing and strategy, and there I saw firsthand the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion work as brands attempt to be much more authentic in their brand experience and not just use stock photos of people of color or pay lip service to individuals from marginalized communities. And as the world has changed and today's consumer has demanded much more of brands, I ended up doing a lot of work with brands, including a significant amount in the tech sector that were with companies that really needed to sort of go completely from the inside out and rethink what they're doing and how their cultures, their commitments, their causes, their relationships with partners in the community, how those needed to be rethought. Additionally, because my career has spanned the nonprofit sector as well, I've done significant work with communities and leading nonprofit organizations in diversity, equity, and inclusion related work. And one of my most relevant experiences to today, to this moment, is that I led the publication of the State of Black Los Angeles report in Los Angeles, in which I led a team of researchers to benchmark outcomes of the Black community in Los Angeles versus other communities and prescribe an action plan for addressing disparities. So I'm very excited to be here and for Emily and I both to bring our experience to bear on these very important questions.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can dive right in to our content here. So we'll start here, and hopefully I'll be able to sort of move my content here forward. Obviously, we're Camber Outdoors. Just a little bit about our background. We're a national nonprofit, and we support workplace inclusion, equity, and diversity. We actually we started as an organization that was formed to support women in the workplace. And a few years ago, our board expanded that mission to be focused on how workplaces more broadly can build those better systems to support employees, to support inclusive spaces. Just to give a little bit of an understanding of kind of framework of where the sort of major areas of inclusion, equity, and diversity work are happening. If we look at the workplace space, so thinking about the human capital, what is the work that you can do to build the systems that support the people who are a part of your organization? Camber Outdoors lives squarely in that space. Beyond the outdoor industry, you may have heard of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. That is a very large national effort focused on Fortune 500 companies, and they're a wonderful resource as well. Inside of corporations, there's an element of corporate marketing and product development that at this point is really an emerging space. Employee resource groups are becoming just a very active and engaged group there. Those are internal groups that are formulated with representation and input from across organizations to help to think about product development for the future and what marketing can look like. And there will probably be some emerging nonprofits that will come there. And then I think a very important distinction is how different work in inclusion, equity, and diversity is that's focused on sort of the indoors. In some ways, Camber is a bit of a misnomer. That from outdoor access, and there are some extraordinary groups like Latino Outdoors and Outdoor Afro that are focused on that outdoor access. And then you'll see here sort of underpinning, there's also incredible work that is happening from a national advocacy front. So that's groups like the NAACP, MALDEF, the ACLU, and our recommendation is that companies and organizations really dig deep to see where can you be activating across all of these areas. So again, just kind of to help to understand the space, we've got kind of an indoor workplace focus. What can we do inside? I know that so many of you on the line own climbing gyms and are owners in that space. So what can you be doing inside? And from a sort of corporate structure, system, organizational supports to make change there, as contrasted with that outdoors access and conservation, as well as more sort of grassroots activism focused. We talk a lot about what's the sort of return on investment. Camber Outdoors is a membership organization, and we're here to support with education, tools, and other resources for our partners. One thing to note, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but we do offer free memberships because we are committed to supporting the industry overall for small businesses, and that's categorized as businesses that are $4 million in annual revenues, North American annual revenues and below, as well as nonprofit organizations. So if you are a leader of one of those groups, please join us on our website, and you can actually apply for membership, and then our tools and resources come to you. So we are very focused on data-driven tools for decision-making. We have some extraordinary data partners, including the Claremont Evaluation Center. And this fall, we'll be fielding a workplace survey as well as an employee survey to gain insights for each of our partners so that they can understand where you stand. I loved the question at the beginning, Laura, just kind of where are you on this journey? And of course, there's a personal journey, but there's also an organizational journey. And so that's where this data will be incredibly supportive of each of our individual partners. We also have an Agile Base Camp, which is a place where there are foundational tools and resources. You can get some of the activation tools that we'll be talking about a little later in this conversation, as well as evergreen content. So you're thinking about, okay, we're ready to move on to a deep dive on a particular subject. You can go back and see, okay, what is the content that's available on that subject, and that's obviously building over time. And then one area that I think is really a differentiator for Camber is that we provide supports at scale. So once you as a company become a member, we have learning activations for people at all levels within your company, and things that are targeted specifically for different groups within a company, but every single one of your employees can activate a free membership. So that's really how we move our content, move our kind of best and promising practices out into the field at scale. So we're really excited. We've got a couple of brands who we just exceeded the 80% of all employees activated mark, which of course we never want to force anyone to activate their membership, but when you start to think about everyone's contribution to learning and making change, that scale is critically important. Our next slide, I'm gonna pass over to Renita, but what I will say as Renita dives deep into our programmatic slides is that they are all available, and we will do they're all available on our social media channels. So the items that we are presenting today, I'm sure you'll be taking a lot of notes, but you can actually also download the documents if you find us on LinkedIn, find us on Instagram. So I encourage you to do that as well. Renita?
Thanks, Emily. What I'm going to do now is take us through our programmatic framework for how Camber Outdoors approaches our inclusion, equity, and diversity work. And we do start with, we sort of flip the acronym of DEI, and we do start with inclusion in order to focus on first creating that inclusive environment that creates a sense of safety and belonging for diverse employees. Undergird that with equitable systems and supports, such as pay equity, fair performance appraisal systems, having the right benefits to meet the needs of the various employee groups that are represented in the company. And so that's I, E for equitable systems and supports, and then lastly, D for diversity, which represents a diverse talent pipeline that Camber Outdoors is trying to help the active outdoors industries build, and the diverse workplace, so that the diversity that the companies are attracting are actually supported through an inclusive leadership style and culture, as well as equitable benefits, policies, and systems. So that's our overall approach. And we focus deeply on the business imperative of DEI. I think at this point, it's been proven long ago that there's business value to having inclusive, equitable, and diverse workplaces, that the best ideas are generated that way, that when employees can bring their whole selves, they can think critically, think creatively, and come to the best solution. In the overall ecosystem of company, community, and consumer, Camber works to create and sustain these workplaces and meet company objectives while also addressing community goals and meeting consumer needs. And when inclusion, equity, and diversity are fully actualized, it's right at the intersection of those three spheres. And what we're seeing today is a merging and a narrowing of the gap between shareholder and stakeholder. So that's what we're trying to work toward, and having an anti-racist workplace is a key tool in achieving that synergy. We released a workplace anti-racism action agenda, and we did that in the face of the heightened national focus on the systemic racism and police brutality facing the African American community. We did that because it's needed industry-wide. Our partners and non-partners, frankly, were crying out for, what do we do? How do we take the next step? And when I think about climbers, I think about how if any group of individuals, any community is focused on, how do I take the next step? How do I focus on that? How do I concentrate on that? It's climbers and the climbing industry. So we're putting out this framework. It's a 3-stage framework: learn, act, change. It's a tool for combating systemic workplace racism. And it's learning, acting, and changing across the 3 spheres that I talked about. I for inclusive leadership and culture, E for the equitable policies and systems, and D for that diverse talent pipeline and workplace. So I will briefly, without reading every one of these many words, walk you through how this 3-stage framework plays out. So starting with the inclusive leadership and culture track. With inclusive leadership and culture, the point is to create this culture of safety, belonging, and opportunity for African American and other employees of color as a focus within your broader inclusion work. The learning stage of that is educating yourself and others on how to address racism, bias, and discrimination. It's taking the onus off of your African American employees or customers or partners and putting it on yourself to say, how can we garner ongoing employee feedback to inform and shape our culture? How can we discover which elements of leadership and culture foster that sense of inclusion? It can differ for each organization. And how can we educate ourselves and our employees on bias, racism, allyship, and other fundamental concepts related to race and race relations? Right now, 6 of the top 10 best-selling books on Amazon are related to racism, and race relations. So clearly, our society right now is in a learn mode, and that gives me hope. That encourages me. So for inclusive leadership and culture, it starts with learning, it moves to acting, and act for us, as we've defined it, is taking action against the recent acts of racial violence targeting the African American community and communities of color. It's a very immediate, direct, deep response to what we're facing right now in our country. And on the inclusive leadership and culture focus, that means condemning racism internally, leveraging the corporate platform to do that externally, and leveraging the influence as small businesses in a community or large companies to dismantle systemic racism, to have a voice and a presence so that local law enforcement is aware that you're watching, being aware of which bills are coming up in terms of legislation that you can possibly play a role in, creating opportunities in your community for dialogue, and establishing or more deeply engaging your internal employee resource groups, mentoring programs, and other inclusion, equity, and diversity tools. So that is part of acting immediately against this situation. And then change is the ongoing, sustaining work of creating high-performing, inclusive, equitable, and diverse workplaces that support African American employees and other employees of color. And I should say that this anti-racism action agenda is part of a broader overall agenda to create and sustain inclusive, equitable, and diverse workplaces. So this will be one part of what Camber Outdoors will be doing to support the industry and our partner companies. When it comes to change for inclusive leadership and culture, our goal is to equip leadership and employees to build these cultures and achieve high levels of sustainable employee engagement and satisfaction with the inclusion, equity, and diversity programming, and really align the culture and values to optimize the brand experience of employees, partners, and the broader community. When it comes to E for equitable policies and systems, essentially it's the same flow of learn, act, and change, learning about which policies are valued by employees of color, acting to audit your current policies and systems and begin to implement those benefits, compensation policies, and HR policies that are truly equitable for the employees in your organization. And then lastly, the change phase of equitable policies and systems is utilizing industry data and employee feedback to ensure equitable systems and ensure benefits that attract and retain employees of color. You may be saying, sounds great, but how do I do that? Utilize what industry data and employee feedback? Well, Camber Outdoors is going to be fielding a workplace survey and an employee survey. The workplace survey will canvass workplaces across our membership. So it's across companies that are committed to working toward inclusion, equity, and diversity. It doesn't mean they've mastered it, but they're committed. So we'll be surveying them to get benchmark data that other companies can use to say, where do I stack up? I may really have some opportunity areas that I didn't realize where I'm really kind of behind the norm, but there may be surprise areas or areas that I'm aware I'm very strong in. And even as a small organization, it can be illuminating to compare yourself versus benchmark data. We'll also be fielding an employee survey of each of our partner companies' employees. So each company will get insight and input on how their own policies stack up and what the daily lived experience is like for their employees. And we will do a deep dive briefing with each member on what that data shows and how their action plan can be developed to go forward. And I would like to just put a reminder out here that we do have the free memberships for small businesses, and those are any businesses with revenues under 4 million. So many of you could join for free and have access to the survey process and the data and many, many other resources to help you in this journey. And then lastly, with diverse talent pipeline and workplace, once again, it's learning, acting, and changing as we reimagine the future of work, build and tap a diverse talent pipeline, and equip and support African Americans in your company and other employees of color. And what we're doing to support our partners there is to help them learn about their own workplace. What are the current and future employee insights that are relevant? We are assembling focus groups of individuals from various communities of color, LGBTQ plus, people with disabilities, to garner insights to share and report out with the industry, because many companies or small businesses or a climbing gym may not have a critical mass of African American or Asian or people with disabilities in their companies. So in order to help you gain insight into what should I be doing, what does a workplace look like that is inclusive and supportive, we're going to be sharing out some of those insights from our sort of mega focus groups. And that's just part of an overall support that we're providing, as well as assessment tools to help you assess the skills and development needs of your employees and provide you with strategies to create a diverse pipeline and ensure retention and advancement. In terms of acting in this immediate situation, broadening outreach to create a diverse talent pipeline, we're already beginning to help partner companies do. Utilizing inclusive recruiting, hiring, and onboarding processes, we'll be introducing a diverse talent pipeline learning sprint in which our partners can engage over a 4 to 6 week period in action modules based on learning, iterating, and improving and optimizing their entire talent pipeline recruiting, hiring, and onboarding process. And then we'll also be providing guidance on upskilling and reskilling and helping our partners once again leverage data to track and measure diversity, satisfaction levels of employees of color, progress versus diversity goals, and overall support in eliminating some of the barriers to advancement and retention, including the lack of performance management systems that are fair, shortage of mentorship and sponsorship opportunities. We'll be doing a building blocks of diversity, equity, and inclusion series that will tackle directly how do you form a diversity council, an employee resource group, start a mentorship program for businesses that want to either get started or deepen what they're doing in terms of inclusive, equitable, and diverse workplaces. So I know that's a lot. I'll stop there. There may be questions already in the chat for Emily and for me, but that's an overview of our anti-racism action agenda. And our approach with this is to share it industry-wide for companies, whether they're partners or not. And our next stage is we are launching an activation of this with our partner member companies, in which we provide the suite of tools and resources and a guided approach to implementation.
So that's something, Renita, I'll just jump in and say I'm really excited about. We really developed the action agenda to answer the question of sort of what do I do, and the activation that will be in the inboxes of all of our members in this next few days is really focused on the how do I do it. So we really live in that guidance and support space, so that because it is a very much an emergent space for companies, and we want to be there with you all along the way. I don't know if you want to dive into the 5 guiding questions. This is another fully public resource that is available on Camber's Instagram, on Camber's LinkedIn page, as well as, of course, to our members as a part of their member dashboard of resources.
Exactly. And I can just give a brief overview. Essentially, as Emily mentioned, we were getting lots of questions about what do I do? How do I do it? And these guiding questions are sort of a starting point for evaluating workplaces to see how healthy are they? Do they respect, empower, and include? What should we be asking ourselves internally? And these questions can literally serve as a template for sitting down and having some internal discussions with your employees and with your leadership team, And essentially it's asking for each person to ask themselves, what are my most important values, and does my workplace support those? And then for leaders to begin asking these questions to team members. How important are diversity, equity, and inclusion to you? What value do they bring to the workplace? And how can we better ensure that we are leveraging these values and helping you to reach your full potential and leverage your skills and abilities? Because again, we're working across that spectrum of inclusion, equity, and diversity, and ensuring that diverse talent is represented across the organization, across functions and levels. And employees should be asking their leaders, and many are, what are you doing to make sure everyone feels included? What are we doing as an organization to create an inclusive culture and to take a stand and have a voice in what's going on? And then all members should be asking customers, what are the values of the customers and communities that we serve? And usually you often don't have to ask, they'll tell you. And does our workplace culture align with those values? And lastly, the entire organization saying, what can we do to make our workplace more inclusive, equitable, and diverse? Can we do better? Can we innovate to become stronger? And we've seen that taking even one of these questions can serve as fodder for robust discussion that can open up ideas for how your particular organization can combat systemic racism by truly beginning to understand your own workplace and assess where you are in that journey and take steps to get to a better place.
So I'll stop
And
the
that's,
screen
there we
share
are.
there.
Yeah.
And
So
All
that's,
I
right.
know we welcome questions.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Emily and Renita, for sharing all of that information and that great work that you all are doing at Camber. So to the audience out there, feel free to go ahead and start putting your questions in the Q&A box. I have a couple of questions that we can start out with. So speaking of kind of, reaching out to your community and your members and trying to understand where they're at, there are lots of climbing gyms in our industry who have members of law enforcement as part of their membership. Do you have any tips or thoughts on, engaging in this work without alienating those groups, and especially when it comes to like the public facing pieces of this work?
Great question.
It really is. It's a great question. I don't know, Renita, if you'd like to start and you want me
Sure,
to.
I'll jump in. I think that first of all, the sensitivity and awareness that we have, that there's a diversity of individuals in the climbing gym, is so important as a foundation. And I think building on that is very key. And I would recommend some one-on-one personal dialogue at various levels with the members of law enforcement that are members of the gym. I know that close relationships form in these climbing gyms, really an atmosphere of support. And I think it's important for the owners of the gym to reach out to various individuals and say, hi, I just want to take the time to let you know that we're in the midst of this. This is going on. We value you, particularly with respect to law enforcement, just because in this climate, in many ways, they are a minority voice in their own way in this. So to be able to say, we are a community here and we respect everyone who respects one another is important, and you are welcome here. I think it's just very important to make that statement that you are welcome here to really all members of the community. And I think when possible, depending upon the gym, if a gym has little gatherings or times to connect, and if not, this may be a time to start that and basically to say, let's have a dialogue and have sort of a facilitated guided discussion amongst those members of the gym who may want to have that discussion. Many people, especially those who are involved in sports that are such passion sports as climbing, there's really no better setting for them to connect with others than around this passion and to find common ground. and to also not feel that they're going to a gym or a place that they go regularly that's a part of their everyday lives that has not acknowledged or connected with the issue going on. So it's really helpful both for the African American and other members of color, and also for law enforcement. I know I'm a member of some groups in my church, that small groups, and there are law enforcement members in those groups. And we make it a point to state what the issues and concerns are, and also state we value you and we know your heart and what you bring to your work. And it's amazing what that one-on-one has done. So I would say start with that, because even in commerce, and especially in small businesses where you have the luxury and the ability to connect one-on-one, these big companies are trying to find the megaphone to get their message across. And a lot of the message that comes across in a climbing gym is the owner walks over, or some of the other owners walk over and say, hey, we're all standing together in this. We're all part of the solution. And on Tuesday night, we're hosting a little wine and cheese to talk about it. So I think that could be a big step. And also, I do think posting signs of solidarity and support can be helpful. Sometimes it gets tricky with the jargon or the language in those signs, but there are ways to express support for members of law enforcement and for members of color. And it's essentially saying that we do all stand together in this, and we recognize all of our members openly and proudly.
I think I would just add, and I think, Renita, you make an excellent point about sort of, in many ways that the climbing gym is a place of intersection, right? For so many different groups. I would just add that it's important to bear in mind, I'm a systems thinker. I think about so much of this in systems, that so much of the national discussion is really about, and will get forwarded and changed because there are systems that are undergirding, that are not working for very large swaths of our community. And so that is a different thing than recognizing the intent of an individual, right? The systems need to be in place that will keep all of our communities safe from police violence. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the police officer who is a part of your climbing community is not also hopeful to that end. So understanding that national debate really will ultimately be focused on changing those systems so that those dangerous individuals can no longer be a part of that system.
And just to build on that, I think getting the message out about that is important, since many people don't necessarily understand that. And I think it's really the foundational point of that undergirds all of this, which is changing the systems. So I think having some of the dialogues that communicate exactly what Emily just spoke about, or even putting out little flyers that say, where do we stand on what's going on? Or how can we answer your questions? And having those sort of little slips of paper that people can just pick up and see, hey, we're focusing on this from the standpoint of changing systems, and systems thinking means changing this, this, and this, but there are individuals who are doing a great job on all fronts, and we support them, and we support the members of law enforcement who are members of our gym. But we are part of the solution of working toward changing the system, because as Emily mentioned, where some people try to paint what's happening as a few good cops or a few bad cops, a system that's working will have a mechanism for weeding out the bad cops. A system that's working will have a way of surfacing that and adjusting the overall system. So it's not just, if there's a good cop, he was a bad person. It really is a systemic issue, but keeping the focus on that and helping to sort of educate your members who are interested will go a long way toward making that distinction between the individual cop who's climbing on the wall next to you.
Yeah. A small follow-up question. I can imagine there's could be no small amount of trepidation for a lot of people when it comes to making a public message like that, especially in the current climate. And likewise, messages of solidarity with the larger racial justice movement as well, worried about different forms of pushback. So might be a really hard question to answer whether you have like some good advice about how, and I think the core advice you had around differentiating systemic issues versus individuals that might be members of your gym is a great one. But yeah, I was curious to see if you had any public messaging from companies, large or small, that you've seen received particularly well, or that you thought were performed particularly well, and for either of those areas, solidarity with racial justice, or highlighting the differences between systemic and individual issues.
So
Great question.
I'm happy to jump in here
Mhm.
just to sort of begin, and then Renita would love your input as well. One of the things that I think is really special about the materials that we've been putting out there is that sort of deeper questioning of your organization. I think the danger in these times is that you are creating a statement that is kind of a one and done experience, right? I blacked out my Instagram on one day. Wasn't that enough, right? But we're talking about a very deeply rooted history of racial injustice. We're talking about systems change. And so, as we all know, if you've ever tried to change any kind of system, that takes very deep, long, ongoing commitment and work. And so on our end, the sort of best advice that we have been sharing is to dig in to those questions around how this actually and meaningfully connects to your own values as corporate leaders, as well as what can you be doing as a part of a plan. You wouldn't make your plan to bring membership in. You wouldn't make your plan to open your climbing gym without an explicit plan, and to really dig in on what can our plan be. What are the things that we can activate on both immediately and on an ongoing basis, and recognizing that is in fact a marathon, and it's a practice, right? It is not something that you get to check off. So I think that in many ways, that's where we've seen both inside of the outdoors economy, as well as very broadly across corporate America, where you have seen people really deeply questioning is where companies have sort of rushed to a message that feels like, okay, well, we've crafted the perfect language for a message, and now we're done. Renita, I don't know if you want to add some things.
And we are providing resources for companies and businesses that are working on those statements with a specific eye toward the statements being action-oriented. So it is a guiding document that will help you write your statement and think through the questions, because any good statement that means business, quote unquote, is one that prescribes and sets forth a commitment to a course of action. It's based on looking within and saying, what do we do well? What could we do better? And here's what we're going to do. And here's how we're going to back it up. And then we commit to monitoring and measuring that. So we will literally in the next couple of days have this resource. It also includes a link to, there's a website that is actually monitoring and releasing statements from companies across the spectrum. And so as statements are being released, they're putting those up there, and they serve as a wonderful compendium of reference points and ideas and examples. And what our document does is sort of provide the elements of what makes any good statement a good statement. For example, there should be a clear calling out of the situation that's facing the African American community. A set of best practices have somewhat emerged on writing these statements. So whereas you could say, we stand in support of all who value a fair and just society. Well, that's nice, but it doesn't call out the injustices that are currently being faced by a particular community. And once you've done that, you can then say, and other employees of color or communities of color. But it's important to take a very clear and definitive stand on the systemic racism and police brutality facing the African American community, so that the statement isn't so high level that it really doesn't say anything and it really doesn't take a stand. And it's by calling out the specific injustices against specific communities that we then have a clearer picture of what needs to be addressed and what needs to be changed. So that's just one example of what we have in that guiding document, to say many well-meaning attempts tend to just do sort of a broad brush and like, we just want a fair and just place for everyone to live in. And we're in a time right now where your customers, both African American and white customers, I mean, people are looking to see, do you care about this? And are you taking a meaningful stand in which you're willing to actually say what that stand is?
That's really good to know that you guys have that resource around statements. I think that'll be really helpful, and we'll get a link for that for folks. So we have a question in the Q&A box, kind of going past that, step of making a statement. This person is saying they've got a lot of great, potentially effective ideas around their company for this kind of work, but they find that they stumble on the implementation. So a couple of examples of ideas they have are developing scholarship programs for the BIPOC community, or route setting mentorship programs. So do you guys at Camber assist with specific program implementation, or do you have resources to help with that implementation step?
So just to sort of come back to, it's a great question, and I love that people are really activating and thinking about what can I do. So for Camber, we're really that guide around your workplace systems, right? So things like guidance of your statement, am I creating job descriptions, or is my sort of recruitment process equitable? Am I reaching a diversity of excellent talent, or is my process an impediment to that? Where it comes to projects like access to the outdoors, there are many wonderful organizations. I always, as a I did my graduate work in nonprofit management and have spent a fair bit of time around and supporting and architecting some very large philanthropy. It's always your best bet to see if there's already a program that you can align yourself with, that you can build a meaningful relationship with, to then activate that support. So it could be your specific scholarship, but connected to a program that's already existing. And there are many excellent outdoor access organizations. They tend to be both regional, some are national, climbing focused and so forth. So I would absolutely encourage exploring which those organizations feel like they're a fit for your company, and being in touch, reaching out and saying, hey, we're interested in being supportive of this outdoor access, and bringing people into our passion for climbing.
Awesome.
I think that sums it up.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of that, we have a question here from Nathan about tips on how to reach out to the Black community and to marginalized communities. There's sort of this, contradictory idea out there where you don't want to put the burden on that community while you're starting to do this work, but also their voices are so important to help guide the work. So what do you make of that, and what's kind of an appropriate way to involve them in the process?
I can start on that, Emily, and then you jump in. I think it's important this really ties into sort of the learn phase of learn, act, change in our anti-racism framework. And I think it's important that every company, no matter how small or how large, takes the time to begin to educate itself and really look at those systems that are in even the smallest company. What are the ways of hiring and recruiting people to work in the climbing gym, or getting our message, our marketing message out there. How are we doing that? Are we doing it in an inclusive way? Are we talking about the issues of the day, even in our messaging in local press and media? But first, we do that by starting with educating ourselves and our employees, who are our most direct interface with that community. When individuals come into that climbing gym, they're interacting with people who have a base of knowledge about the issues, who are sensitive to how to speak with people about them. They don't, as they're ringing up the cost for the day's climb, they don't say, how about this, those people out there protesting and looting and riot, isn't it crazy? What's going on with that? We had to board up our windows, and all the emphasis is on property and not on people or issues or what has happened or triggered some of the response. So a lot of it is that sort of consciousness raising and awareness of your employees and how they interface with that community. And I think there are many, many organizations that are working to raise the consciousness of employees and individuals on the issues of the day. So I would start there, so that it doesn't just become a matter of who comes into your store, or trying to get someone that who's Black to sort of write something up for you. But really, it's based on educating yourself and beginning to have community events, I believe, that kind of bring people into the store. And if you can find a local speaker who is knowledgeable on the issues, again, not just anyone, but maybe go through some of the organizations that we have links to on our website, you can possibly find people to bring a perspective into the community through your climbing gym.
Yeah, Renita, I think you make an excellent point. And to just sort of to reinforce that we're all responsible for our own education in this moment in time. I had a conversation with someone recently, and they said, well, I don't know what I don't know. And I said, well, it's time to figure out what you don't know, right? So on our Instagram page, there's a link to a very curated short list of reading about workplace equity and inclusion. There's 6 books you can actually click through and support Black-owned bookstores to educate yourself. And those readings, as well as the work that we're doing specifically with Camber, are opportunities to continue to sort of deep dive. But again, not putting that education responsibility. We've built a system in this country that's not working for everyone, and it really does take all of us to do the work of dismantling that system and rebuilding something that works for all. So that takes time and effort and energy in educating ourselves. And I think that's a really just critically important point there. And also, to Renita's point, there are extraordinary anti-racist organizations across communities. So wherever you are coming from, reaching out, making a donation, thinking about and asking the question of those organizations, how can we be more meaningfully involved? How can we support the work that you are doing? The education will continue to flow from that as well.
Excellent points, thank you. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I have one question. We have several questions here that I just don't think we'll have time to get to, but we'll finish up with this one. And the question is, what sustainable changes have you seen and documented in the organizations you've worked with? I don't know if there's any examples that you could share that stand out to you from your partners.
Sure. Well, it's important to remember we're both still relatively new to the organization as well. So there are some things that we are just even as Camber at the early stages of tracking. But I do think when we take a look at particularly around employee engagement, this is a moment in time where we are seeing a lot of employees want to get activated at their particular organizations, at their particular companies. And so some great successes have been had at companies where they've encouraged that employee activation, and really focus that activation around specific subjects, because you're running a business, so you have business objectives, but how can we improve? How can we improve our our climbers' experience? What are the things that we as a local company could be more involved in, and leveraging those excellent employee resources, I think is one place that we're already seeing companies really begin to bear fruit. Renita, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Well, I think an area in which we've seen significant progress is in businesses and companies seeking that employee feedback and coming up with very simple ways, from simple survey monkey surveys to having dialogue and conversations, either one-on-one or in groups, about how the organization can create a more supportive culture that creates a sense of belonging. And that is a huge step that goes a long way toward making change, and that can happen in an organization of any size. So that real focus on employee feedback and dialogue is critical. And we've also seen quite an increase in the number of companies forming employee resource groups in which the various communities represented in a company can affiliate and connect. And even in smaller organizations, there may not be the critical mass to have these employee resource groups of 1 or 2 people, but there can be sort of diversity council discussions in which the company members are coming together specifically to read one book, or to talk about an issue that's facing their community, or to say, as we introduce the new introduction to climbing class, how can we broaden our outreach to make sure we're hitting a broader spectrum of the community?
I think we'll also get to a lot of, the companies spend a lot of time thinking about their talent pipeline. And so that's also a place where we've seen some places that have really broadened their pool just by making changes in their systems. And it's part of the reason we're actually doing a talent pipeline deep dive over the summer to help all of our members to think about, how do I build that robust pipeline of talent into my organization at all levels.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your insights and resources and information that you've shared today. It was really interesting and useful for us. So thank you again. I just wanted to share a little bit about, going back to the idea that we were talking about earlier of backing up any sort of, statements or public facing information that you put out there with action plans. And so, the CWA, we've been thinking about that a lot lately. And we have created a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan. It's phase 1 of what we fully expect to be a multi-phase, ongoing, and long-term process. But the ultimate goal of the plan is to transform the CWA and the indoor climbing industry into more just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive places. So we have we're in early days of starting phase 1 of the plan, and we will be announcing more information about that soon, hopefully next week. So keep an eye out for that information. Again, we have our calls every Tuesday. So our upcoming webinar next week is going to be focused on open gyms and doing an update with a few gyms that have been open for a little while, talking about their experiences and how things are going. If your gym is open and you would like to share your experience, please contact Garnet Moore at garnet@climbingwallindustry.org to participate on that discussion. And as always, you can count on us at the CWA. Garnet, Alexandra, and I are here for you guys. So if you have questions around diversity, questions or things around the coronavirus or anything else that you're dealing with at this time, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you so much, Emily and Renita, for these amazing resources. We really appreciate the work that you guys are doing, and your willingness to take some time at this very busy time for your organization to spend time with us and the indoor climbing industry.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who joined today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thanks guys, and we'll see you next time.